In late 2025, something unthinkable is happening, as Germany's industrial icon quietly retreats while another European nation accelerates into a very different future. Volkswagen, a company synonymous with German manufacturing dominance, is closing factories at home for the first time in nearly a century, sending shockwaves through Europe's economic core. 800 kilometers east in Hungary, factories are not closing at all. They are multiplying faster than workers can be hired to fill them. While much of Europe slides toward recession and wrestles with trade wars and demographic decline, Hungary is quietly breaking investment records. Real wages are rising sharply, unemployment is near full employment levels, and foreign capital continues pouring into the country at historic scale. For years, critics claimed Viktor Orbán was isolating Hungary from Europe and the world through stubborn nationalism and political defiance. Yet the numbers force an uncomfortable question that many in Brussels would rather not confront directly. What if Orbán's strategy is not reckless isolation but a calculated response to a fractured global economy? What if, while Europe debated values and regulations, Hungary was designing an economy built to survive the 21st century? This story is not about ideology or personality, but about a radical economic experiment unfolding in the heart of Europe. It's about a small country attempting to rewrite the rules of globalization rather than obey them. To understand why Hungary appears calm while Europe panics, one must understand Orbán's central idea of economic neutrality. Economic neutrality rejects choosing sides in a divided world and instead seeks profit production and leverage from every direction. In a global system splitting between East and West, Orbán argues that loyalty is a liability rather than a protection. Align fully with one bloc and you trade with only half the world, while decisions are made far away without you. Hungary's answer is to become indispensable, a meeting ground where rival powers can do business without political interference. In this vision, American, capital German engineering and Chinese technology are not enemies but complementary tools. Instead of resisting globalization's fractures, Hungary positions itself directly in the cracks where value concentrates. It is a risky strategy that angers allies, confuses critics, and defies conventional economic wisdom. But as factories rise and wages grow, Hungary's gamble demands serious attention rather than dismissal. To grasp Hungary's calm confidence, we must return to a moment when most of Europe chose confrontation while Budapest chose calculation. In late 2024, the United States and the European Union intensified efforts to decouple from China, calling it economic security. Orbán publicly rejected this logic, arguing that breaking with the world's largest factory was not strategy, but self-inflicted decline. He warned that the global economy was splitting into rival blocs, and small nations trapped inside blocs eventually suffocate. If you serve one camp loyally, you remain distant from power trade with fewer partners and absorb decisions made elsewhere. Hungary's alternative was radical neutrality, refusing to choose between East and West while extracting value from both. Orbán described Hungary as a keystone state, a place holding opposing economic forces together rather than pushing them apart. This neutrality is not moral neutrality, but transactional pragmatism grounded in production jobs and leverage. Germany, for example, is attempting to block Chinese electric vehicles to protect its legacy auto industry. Yet Chinese electric vehicles are arriving regardless, cheaper, technologically superior, and battery-dominant. Rather than resist this tide, Hungary chose to build the harbour where these vehicles could land legally. The government's 2025 action plan openly targeted growth rates between 3 and 6%. For much of the Eurozone, especially Germany, such growth sounds like fantasy amid stagnation and contraction. Hungary pursued growth by offering investors something rare in Europe, permission to build without lectures. Chinese firms were told there would be no sanctions, no moral posturing, only contracts and compliance. The result was predictable and explosive as capital flows followed certainty rather than ideology. While German policymakers debated protection, German companies quietly expanded production in Hungary. Survival demanded access to Chinese technology, and Hungary became the only safe meeting room. Budapest transformed from political outlier into industrial broker, facilitating deals others could not. Economic neutrality turned Hungary into a platform rather than a pawn. Philosophy becomes reality when concrete is poured, and Hungary's neutrality strategy crystallized into steel roads and factories rising across the countryside. Drive south along the motorway towards Szeged, and the future announces itself in cranes, trucks, and freshly paved industrial parks. There, a Chinese electric vehicle giant selected Hungary for its first European passenger car factory, a decision worth billions. This factory alone creates thousands of jobs and allows vehicles to carry the coveted label made in the European Union. That label quietly bypasses tariffs and political barriers that Brussels struggles to enforce. But the car factory is only the opening act in a far larger industrial symphony. Travel east and you encounter the world's largest battery producer constructing one of Europe's biggest gigafactories. This single investment ranks among the largest foreign commitments in Hungarian history. Here is the move critics often miss because it requires thinking several steps ahead. Right next to that Chinese battery plant, a German luxury automaker is building its own massive electric vehicle facility. This proximity is not coincidence, it is design. German electric cars require Chinese batteries, yet importing them directly has become politically and logistically difficult. Hungary solved the problem by bringing them out into the factory. On Hungarian soil, German engineering and Chinese battery technology merge without friction. This ecosystem locks Hungary into the heart of Europe's future supply chains. It also makes Hungary strategically painful to punish. Any attempt to cut Hungary off economically would harm German industry itself. The supply chains are now intertwined too deeply to unravel without damage. Critics focus on protests, environmental concerns, and guest workers, and those issues are real. But from a macroeconomic view, Hungary has secured relevance for decades. Economic strategy alone does not win elections, so Hungary's experiment extends deeply into society, families, and everyday household finances. While much of Europe debates migration as a solution to demographic collapse, Hungary chose a far more controversial path. Instead of importing workers, the state decided to subsidize births using direct, unapologetic financial incentives. As of late 2025, Hungarian mothers with 3 children pay 0 personal income tax for life. Not reduced tax, not temporary relief, but absolute exemption written directly into law. This policy represents the most aggressive family support program anywhere in the Western world. Beyond tax relief, the state offers subsidized loans that disappear entirely if families have children. 7-seat family vehicles are discounted, housing loans are forgiven, and monthly benefits are guaranteed. Altogether, Hungary spends roughly 4 to 5% of its entire economy on families. That level of spending rivals what many NATO countries devote to national defense. Critics label the policy social engineering or ideological population control, but Orbán frames it as labor market arithmetic rather than cultural warfare. Europe's workforce is shrinking faster than automation can compensate. Germany alone requires hundreds of thousands of migrants each year just to maintain output. Hungary rejected this dependency and chose to manufacture its own future workers. The gamble is enormous, slow and brutally expensive. It will take decades to reveal whether birth subsidies can outperform migration. But if successful, Hungary may enter the middle of the century with demographic stability others lack. For the 250,000 mothers already paying 0 tax, the system feels less like theory and more like reward. To them, the Orban economy does not feel fragile, it feels personal. Behind factories and family policy lies a simpler political truth. People vote with their paychecks and employment remains the most persuasive argument. When Orbán first took power, Hungary's unemployment rate hovered above 11%, a legacy of crisis and post-transition collapse. Today, unemployment sits near what economists define as full employment, meaning almost everyone who wants work can find it. This shift explains more about Hungary's political stability than any headline about ideology or institutions. While Southern Europe struggles with chronic youth unemployment, Hungarian factories compete aggressively for workers. Employers now offer higher wages, training and bonuses simply to retain staff. Inflation punished households brutally during the energy shock, but the rebound matters just as much. In 2024 and 2025, real wages adjusted for inflation began rising again. For ordinary workers, this recovery feels tangible, not theoretical. When media outlets warn of collapse, voters compare headlines to their bank balances. That disconnect breeds skepticism toward external criticism and reinforces domestic support. Yet Orbán understands that foreign factories alone do not guarantee national prosperity. Without intervention, Hungary risks becoming merely an assembly line for multinational giants. To counter this, the state launched a massive program to build domestic capital. Billions in low-cost loans and grants target small and medium-sized Hungarian businesses. The objective is to integrate local firms into global supply chains rather than exclude them. Seats, glass, software and logistics should be Hungarian, not imported. This strategy deliberately favors national capital over pure market efficiency. Free market purists object, but stability often conflicts with textbook economics. In a fractured world, Hungary chose protection over purity. Cheap energy may be the least glamorous pillar of Hungary's strategy, yet it quietly underpins every factory, household and paycheck. While much of Europe embraced energy shock as moral necessity, Hungary chose raw economic survival. Orbán refused to sever access to Russian gas, arguing that sanctions should not freeze ordinary citizens. Critics labelled this dangerous dependence, and geopolitically they were not wrong. But the economic consequences across Europe tell a harsher story. German electricity prices tripled, forcing factories to shut down or flee. In Hungary, production expanded precisely because energy remained affordable. The government enforced strict price controls on household gas and electricity. For families, this meant predictable bills instead of impossible choices. For industry, it meant a competitive advantage impossible to replicate elsewhere. Battery factories consume massive power, and without cheap energy, they simply do not exist. Hungary's energy policy became an industrial magnet. Morality aside, energy costs determine where factories live or die. This pragmatic approach created a moat Western Europe cannot easily cross. Yet energy is only half of sovereignty, finance completes the picture. Hungary learned this lesson painfully during the global financial crisis. In 2008, the country collapsed and accepted rescue under strict foreign control. The experience shaped Orbán's obsession with financial independence. Since then, Hungary diversified its debt to avoid dependence on any single lender. This strategy traded short-term pain for long-term leverage. One final pillar completes the picture: Hungary's rejection of ideological regulation in favor of unapologetic profit-driven investment. While Western firms navigate complex ESG reporting, Hungary signals a simpler rule set focused on production and compliance. Investors are told to build factories, follow labor law, and leave politics at the door. This ideological deregulation attracts businesses exhausted by cultural mandates and regulatory uncertainty. In Hungary, capital is not asked to perform virtue, only to perform. This posture positions Budapest as a rare zone where business remains just business. Yet the boldest bet of all was not economic but geopolitical. For years, Orbán aligned openly with Donald Trump while Europe distanced itself. He wagered Hungary's diplomatic future on a single outcome. When that bet paid off, Hungary transformed from outsider into bridge. Orbán positioned himself as a leader able to speak with Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and Kiev alike. If peace reshapes Eastern Europe, Hungary stands ready as logistical and industrial hub. We return now to the opening question: what if Orbán is right? Hungary is not comfortable, not pretty, and not morally simple. It's a strange hybrid of German industry, Chinese capital, American politics, and Russian energy. This Frankenstein economy is risky, controversial, and undeniably alive. If it succeeds, it challenges Europe's assumption that prosperity requires ideological uniformity. It suggests sovereignty may sometimes pay better than consensus. That possibility, more than failure, is what truly unsettles Brussels. The experiment continues and the verdict remains unfinished.